Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Adrian Maydanich. I'm a freshman at the college studying economics and government, and I'm a member of the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to note the exit doors, which are located on the park side and JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please exit at the door closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please now take a moment to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate Safina Chisik-Singh.
Thank you for coming to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum today. We are honored to be joined today by our distinguished guest, Ajay Banga. A visionary business executive and global leader, Ajay Banga currently serves as president of World Bank Group, where he is leading efforts to modernize the institution and address some of the world's most pressing challenges. Before his nomination to the World Bank, Banga built a career across the private and public sectors. He served as president and CEO of MasterCard, where he played a pivotal role in expanding financial access and driving digital transformation in global payments. He later served as chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce and as vice chairman at General Atlantic, focused on sustainable investments and economic development. Banga's leadership has extended beyond finance into climate action and global development. He has championed methane reduction initiatives to combat climate change, pioneered programs that bring digital financial services to underserved populations, and continued to focus on fostering resilient economies in the face of geopolitical and environmental uncertainty. His contributions have earned him numerous accolades, including the Padma Shri, one of India's highest civilian honors, recognizing his lasting impact on business, finance, and global development. Joining Ajay Banga in conversation today is Asim Khwaja, director of the Harvard Center for International Development and the Sumitomo-FASID professor for international finance and development. Together, they will discuss how the World Bank is evolving to tackle the intertwined challenges of our time, from job creation and inclusive economic growth to working with the private sector and making development central to global stability and opportunity. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs and the Harvard Center for International Development, and is part of the CID Future of U.S. Foreign Aid series. Now, please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Thank you. Great. Welcome, everyone. So I wanted to thank the IOP for hosting us, the Belfer Center for co-hosting the event with us. We are the Center for International Development. Just a few words about Harvard CID. We're a university-wide center which really focuses on basically building a thriving world for all. We're a bunch of quantitative and field-based development economists and sociologists and anthropologists and epidemiologists, people who really care about how do we figure out how to solve some of the most pressing problems the world faces.
And you wear really nice socks.
And I wear nice socks. Thank you, Ajay. That was the only value add I have for today's session. So I'm happy to have revealed it right up front. We're going to have fun. So
I'm going to make sure he forgets this. I try to steal that little piece of paper to see what he would do.
We can flip roles right now. The series we're doing now is part of a series we've been running, The Future of Foreign Aid. This is the fifth in that series. We've already had one on the politics, one on the humanitarian aspect of it, one on the development economics aspect of it. And today we're going to hear about a very important set of actors, multilateral actors in this space. And I'm really grateful for Ajay for taking the time. We've been trying to get Ajay to speak to us ever since he became the president, and I'm glad that Ajay was able to make the time today to be with us. I'm really grateful. I know your time is super precious. I know you spent time earlier in our classes as well, so thank you for spending the day with us. The structure of the conversation is going to be about 40 minutes or so of Ajay and I chatting the way we are. I have permission from Ajay. I thought, Ajay, we're going to jump into each of those conversations because I think it'll be fun to just get a sense of what this exciting space is about. We're going to start with broadly the development context that we are in today, talk a bit about the role of the World Bank, and then with Ajay's permission, talk a bit about Ajay as a person. His personal life is fascinating, and I thought it'd be great for us to hear about that as well.
Depends which part of my personal life.
Depends how much you bribe me, Ajay, which parts I can go and which parts I can't. So let me situate where we are, and let me start with kind of the positivity of where we are, because it's easy to kind of get in the clouds. 80 years ago, the world came together from a really brutal period of world wars and the Great Depression. And we came together in a structure which the World Bank is one of the entities which we constructed, this post-Bretton Woods structure. And at the time we came together, the world was really in a tough situation. Extreme poverty was 60% in the world. And fast forward 80 years, we've made tremendous progress. And I think it's important to recognize that. Extreme poverty is down to less than 10%, in no small part to institutions like yours. And I want to situate us in that moment. But at the same time, a lot of us are also reeling from a different kind of moment. In light of what's happened in the USAID and FCDO, there's a concern that, are the resources that we're devoting to international development at risk, or is this just a change? And what I want to start with, Ajay, with the first question is really, do you think this is another pivotal moment in development like we saw 80 years ago, or is this just business as usual?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think the aid architecture is undergoing a fundamental rethink, because I don't think this is only about one country. The UK just announced that they have to put more money towards building their defense capabilities, and they're going to take it from their overseas development assistance. So I don't think this is a single country or a moment of that type. But having said that, I do believe that the best way to do something about development is to get young people to have a livelihood, whether that's a job with a company, a small business, a small farm, or it's an entrepreneurial opportunity. That, to me, is the ultimate way to get people out of poverty. In fact, if you look at the statistics on poverty over the last so many years, the biggest differences have happened in places like China and India and Mexico and Turkey and Bangladesh and Vietnam. And it's not a coincidence. Those are also the countries where the single largest number of jobs have been created over the past 30, 40 years. And so, as a friend of mine once said, I was saying this in Megan's class, that poverty is both a state of mind and a state of being. And the being part is the earning. The mind part is the dignity that earning and a job gives you as a person. And I think we should think about the aid architecture not in terms of individual components of it, but how we can make lemonade out of the lemons. And that has to be jobs out of what we do. If we can focus correctly on that and do it in a way that allows us to prioritize and choose few things to do, but do the ones that deliver sort of the best result, I still think we've got a pathway to think our way through.
So I know you spend a lot of time thinking about jobs, and I'd love to kind of spend more time there, and we will. I want to come back to that, what you just said, and sort of get into a bit of the meat of how do we create jobs and what does that mean. But before we go there, just, our students get asked a lot of this question, and I guess the world is asking this question, which is why do international development? And there's different perspectives you can take over here. You can take the perspective of a donor country, of a country which is contributing to the act of development. You can also take the perspective of a recipient country, which is on the receiving end a lot of the support as well. I wanted to get a sense from you to say what is the reason d'etre, if you will, for development now? Is it different from what it was before, or is it still the same?
I mean, at the most elementary level, it's about being in it together. I get that. But I think you've got to think beyond that. And what's in it for development always has to be answered from the perspective of what's in it for the taxpayers of the country who are trying to do something with that money in another location. And I think that answer has to come from both. It has to fit some way to your model. So to give you an example, I think one of the biggest challenges, back to our jobs point, is that if we don't create those jobs, you're going to get a surge in migration. And if you look at the demographic dividend, as people call it, or a demographic bulge that's coming through the emerging markets right now, over the next 12 to 15 years, somewhere around 1.2 billion young people are going to become eligible for a job. And the same countries are currently forecasted to create 420 million jobs. Now, the forecasts are made by economists like me, so please take them with a big pinch of salt, preferably a shaker of salt. And forecasts are not destiny.
Yeah.
So we can do something about it, but you have to do something about it. You can't just say, oh, let's hope it gets better. Hope's not a strategy either. So let's assume we're off by some numbers. There's still hundreds of millions of young people who won't have a job. That's going to be a big challenge. So as I was telling folks in Europe the other day, Europe has 3.5 million legal migrants in a year. They need them because they've got a declining population and they need the right mix of migration. They also have 1.1 million people who apply for asylum every year. If you were living on the ground in Europe, you would think it's the other way around, much more illegal than legal. But just wait 5 years, and the 1.1 million illegal will become 5, because that's the way the population dynamics of Africa are working. And so, I think this is a real challenge for our societies, because it hurts both those who live here, even if you were born here or you're a migrant like me who came here many years ago. I'm a legal migrant. I earned my way to my green card and my passport. I pay taxes. I've run a private company. I've done public service. I'm trying to do what I can to repay the country of my adoption. But on the street, who would know that I'm legal or illegal? I don't want me and my wife and children to carry the burden of being thought of illegal. So even legal migrants don't like illegal migration. This is an issue that can tear our societies apart if not properly dealt with. On the other hand, if you do the right thing with it, think of the opportunity in those countries for companies, our companies, other people's companies, of jobs, of consumption, of products, of intellectual property. Think of the opportunity. Then it becomes a real demographic dividend. If we don't deal with it well, this is not a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a freight train coming our way. And that's what we have to think about. And that's where I'm driven by everything that I'm focused on. All the rest of the aspects, to me, are inputs to this topic. The outcome has got to be where we go. And Mike reminded me of something I'd said in his presence one day, which is the tyranny of small things is bad for us. If you do too many things, nothing gets done. If you can just focus on a couple of things, which are challenging but also a huge opportunity, I think there's a lot to do.
So you've talked a lot about prosperity as well, and it was one of the 5 pillars of what you were working on. As we think about poverty and prosperity, I want you to help us understand, the way I think about it is I'm a development economist. I spend a lot of time talking to people.
Sorry, you're one of those guys who made that forecast.
I may have contributed partly to it. I've yet to meet a poor person whose aspiration in life is to not be poor.
Yeah.
It's to say, gosh, I just wish I was above 250 or 375 or whatever it is. And as you think about the potential we have in these parts of the world, what's this? Are we putting an arbitrary ceiling on people with this kind of poverty line and above it or below it? How should we view individuals?
I don't think about it as a poverty line. I think about it as allowing people to reach their potential. And the best way to think about allowing people to reach their potential is to think about what we can do to create the environment for them to have the freedom to pull to that potential. And I think that environment has to be 3 things. The first one has to be infrastructure in a country. Education, skilling, roads, bridges, airports, electricity, digital connectivity, that stuff. The second one has to be regulatory policy and practices that enable things to work, whether it's labor law, land law, corporate bankruptcy, other bankruptcy law, anti-corruption laws, the right governance and transparency. That's why I'm a big fan of digital public infrastructure. I think it creates transparency. It encourages that. It encourages better domestic resource mobilization. All that stuff that we talk about is in that second pillar. And then the third pillar is to enable the private sector of that country, small, medium, large, global guys, local guys, smallholder farmers, whatever. Allow them to prosper. Just give them the space to play and win. And very rarely do countries get those three things right. But if you go back and look at any country that has progressed its way through the system, they've got those right. People forget that South Korea, which today is a developed economy by any stretch of anyone's imagination, was actually a country that used to get IDA grants just 25 years ago. Or that the bullet trains in Japan were financed by the World Bank after the Second World War. Or that Turkey and India and China were all recipients of IDA aid just a short while ago. And so countries do make it through at different levels of success, depending on how well they get those three things done. The infrastructure, the right kind of regulatory policy environment, and then the enablement of the private sector. That's kind of where I'm going, where we are directing the bank's energy.
So I just touched a bit too close to home. The South Korea example is particularly poignant for me. I'm originally Pakistani, and in the early 60s, for those of who are Pakistani or South Asian over here, there was an article comparing, in The Economist, the two stars in Asia were South Korea and Pakistan. And fast forward now, apparently they were. In fact, the World Bank's first really large successful project was actually in Pakistan, which was the Indus Basin Water Treaty and creating a very complicated irrigation agreement between India and Pakistan. So this question of yours to say two countries start at similar positions and one has a very different trajectory than the other, both may have been recipients of World Bank support at that time, yet their trajectories are fundamentally different, sadly.
Because I don't think it's about the World Bank support. I think the World Bank support is a small cog in the wheel of what moves these countries forward. We should not overrate what the bank does or does not do in a country. It's a catalyst. But the country has to own things and do something about it. Leadership, governance matters. People matter. Their energy matters. You can't make that up from the outside. You just cannot.
So, but you've talked a bit about, Ajay, in building institutional capacity as well.
Yeah.
And it's something that you think the bank can help do. So do we try and do that? Do we pick and choose regimes, or we look for opportunities where it's possible for us to make a difference, or do we keep hitting our wall against even institutional obstacles?
No, I think that middle pillar, the regulatory policy and governance pillar, I think the bank has a real role to play there. I believe that what I call the knowledge bank is as important, if not more important, than the money bank. And if you actually think about a country's development over time, the larger the economy of that country, the less relevant the money is that we can lend them. So if you took, we were talking about India a minute ago, if you took India, if I were to give India $3.5 billion a year for various projects, it's good, but it's a rounding error in their budget. But the knowledge we bring on everything from hydroelectric to geothermal to education and skilling to things we can do with policy and laws, that is priceless and invaluable. And I think that understanding that role in the bank is kind of important. We are really successful when countries graduate from needing money from us. That's when we declare victory. If we keep them connected to us for money, that's not a good day to be. You should want them to stop giving you money, stop taking money from you, and start giving you money for the other countries. That's a success.
On this knowledge thing, I want to pick up on that thread a bit further. We're sitting at Harvard. We tend to think that we contribute somewhat to the world's knowledge, or at least
Who's we?
Local. This is collective we.
Such an easy shot.
This collective we.
Sorry, I have a slightly crazy sense of humor.
This is a Punjabi humor. This is the older Punjabi brother making fun of the younger Punjabi brother. So,
just to be clear, both my girls went to Harvard, so I do believe that there's some value here.
He did go and talk to Stanford before he did to us, so we won't hold that against him. We think of the academy
My
as...
elder daughter went to GSP.
I will resist the next temptation. We think of the academy as producers of knowledge as well. How does the knowledge the World Bank produce different from what we do? Is it the same thing that universities are doing, that academia is doing, or is your knowledge a different type?
Well, that's an excellent point. So one of the best parts about the bank are these people who've lived and worked in so many countries with their families around the world. They've moved from one place to the other. They're deep subject matter specialists, some of them in their space of specialization, but others are generalists who've done, kind of TT as many of these task team leaders, loan officers who've moved across many countries. What they bring is that practical application of what they have seen from their academic pursuit being applied on the ground with the challenges they see when they're getting things done. And I think that combination is pretty unique and helpful. They should, and they must always collaborate with new academic research and thinking, because your learning never ends, right? And people like you, the people you work with, are part of our inspiration, as well as things that we can learn and work with. So that's how it should work. And I think it kind of does most times.
I agree, and I'm glad you said that, because before Ajay and I were talking earlier, and I was acknowledging the fact that a lot of my own personal research career started with collaborations at the World Bank. I do a lot of work in education, and my first project was really with someone who I consider a mentor, a woman called Tara Vishwanath, who we know, who was in the operations in the World Bank and was really interested in education reform in a country.
You do know that early childhood development is a big indicator of your future. So if in your early childhood you ended up working with us, I'm sorry for you. But that's a different topic.
I don't think I was that young, but yes, I appreciate. But this idea of research meets practice, it's something, we're sitting at the Kennedy School. This is a school of practice. And one of the things I think is beautiful about Harvard is we have tremendous professional schools, yes. And we have disciplinary departments as well. And this idea of coming together and producing knowledge, but also recognizing that there's deep contextual knowledge. I think what is unusual about the World Bank, and I want us to appreciate this, is the operational side of the World Bank is not just operations, but it's also knowledge generation. And I think that's what, Ajay, you're alluding to. It's not just DEC, which is where the research happens at the bank, it's actually this combination between the two.
We've just launched a series of academies, which are almost 55 different verticals, that bureaucrats and others, policymakers in countries, can learn from, where they'll get a chance to get exposed to people who've done that in other countries. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to create. We're launching another program, which is a fellowship program for bureaucrats from the emerging markets who have done good work in their country. So let's say it's somebody from Brazil who in the last couple of years has participated very actively in fighting off the deforestation of the Amazon. Or it's somebody from India who has done great work on building roads and infrastructure in the past 7-8 years. Or it's somebody, and so on and so forth. You pick a country, somebody from Vietnam who has done good work on changing the methane emissions from rice growing. And could we take them to another country for a year or two, where they can apply that expertise to help that country in that space, and hopefully go back to their own country a year or two later, better qualified, better capable, and a much wiser and mature person. That's the kind of thing I'm trying to create.
I think also for us, and many students sitting in the audience as well, I think it's exactly this mix. The best ideas come from the world. We may teach here tools and techniques and methodologies, but really you're driven inspiration by both what the real problem is on the ground, but also in the process of doing this, Ajay, I'd love to hear a bit more about this local talent generation. Like in some sense, when the bank offices are locally there, a lot of individuals working in the bank aren't necessarily people coming from outside, but they are people from the community who are building these skills and then entering a global network, right? Talk a bit about that. What is the role? I think of the bank as a talent creator as well.
So we've got, about 40,000 total people working for us, about 25,000 full-time, 15,000 in consulting in one way or the other. About 55% of the people are outside of the US, 60% outside of the US, 40% in the US. If you came into the office in the US, you'd get about 25% American staff, and then you'd get a mix from all over the world who've worked with us in those countries and come through a cycle. Similarly, if you went to Côte d'Ivoire and Abidjan, you'd find employees from different parts of the world, in addition to locals. And that melting pot is very much a part of what people come to the World Bank for. What we're trying to do is to manage their careers in a more organized and structured way, so that they can have a way of interacting in the bank that says, what do I want to do in the next 3 years? What do I want to do in the next 5 years? And whose job is it to get you that opportunity? So that it's not that you kind of wind your way through it, but that there's a targeted way to get you through where you'd like to go. That work is new and being done as we speak. But, talent is everywhere, opportunities are not, right? So the trick is to find the right people and give them an opportunity.
So I want to tie that to the jobs focus you have. One thing, at least in the research I've seen, and colleagues of mine have done phenomenal work, Danny Roderick, Gordon Henson are working on a project called Reimagining the Economy over here. This idea of, if you need jobs, which side do you push more on? Do you just empower people? Do you just skill the world, and these talented people will create jobs and find jobs and become entrepreneurs? Or do you work with firms to just create jobs directly? I understand the answer is both, but I wanted to kind of push you and say, if you were to pick one, do you invest in people or do you try and create jobs by investing in firms or employers?
My answer is neither. And I think that the way jobs get created on the ground, once you go past those three pillars of enabling infrastructure, policy, and the private sector, let's take Africa or Latin America. There are 5 areas where jobs will get created, and I'm focusing on these out of a Jobs Council work that President Thurman of Singapore and former President Michelle Bachelet of Chile are leading for us with a bunch of CEOs and some economists and a couple of NGOs. And the idea is 5 places where jobs will come, where we believe there will be 2 things about these jobs that are important. One, they do not rely on outsourcing jobs from the Western world. Because my belief is that model worked for the past 30, 40 years, but it's running into obvious political headwinds. And therefore, that model may not be the best way to think about the next 20, 30 years of job creation. And the second thing is AI and its advent with robotics and all the rest of it. How do we find jobs in the emerging markets which may be somewhat cushioned from that impact for a while? Because you need to get off the ground with these. And so these 5 areas, the first one is the creation of that infrastructure. It's construction and creation, not just in actually constructing it, but in what it will enable when it's ready. Roads, bridges, airports, schools, and the like. The second one is in agriculture as a business. So if you take Africa for a minute, Africa has enough land and water to feed itself and a number of us. But today, Africa is food stressed. And the reason for it being food stressed is many things, but one of the reasons is that only 6% of Africa is irrigated. A comparative number for Asia is 37%. Soil testing stations don't exist on the ground in Africa. A soil testing station is the size of this table. It doesn't exist on the ground. Therefore, you use the wrong fertilizer on the wrong soil. Agricultural warehouses. If you grow food today in Uganda and you move it to Angola, it goes from Uganda to Shanghai, around the Cape of Good Hope, to come back to Angola. That's a bit like sending food from Portugal to Italy via Brazil. It makes no sense. But it's happening as we speak. And so, if you want to allow smallholder farmers to not have all their children sell the land and become a part of urban poverty, then you have to start thinking about giving them access to markets and better seeds and all the rest of it through cooperatives and the like where they are. And I think that's the second big piece. The third big piece is primary health centers. So not just because you'll make healthier workforce, but you'll create jobs for nurses and medical diagnostic technicians and PPE manufacturers, things that we need to do. The fourth is tourism, which is a more obvious one. And the fifth one is manufacturing for local, regional, bilateral kind of trade, including the minerals and metals that Africa has, which we can help to manufacture with jobs on the ground, all that. Whether it's done through companies, small firms, or entrepreneurial opportunities is besides the point. All 3 are important. But none of these require on outsourcing. None of these rely as much on AI today as the rest of them. So in all of them, they're kind of focused.
So Ajay, some of these sound like particular bets we're making on sectors, like agriculture, or specific inputs.
It's not a bet.
Right?
You're going to need food. And the way the population is growing, the food we are growing today is going to be inadequate. So it's actually not a bet. It's a very practical issue that needs to be thought through. And Africa needs to grow food. Otherwise, 1.5 billion people in Africa, which is where it is going, and it's going to go to even higher, where's that food going to come from?
Although that sounds a bit like a Malthusian argument, and if anything, the latest, these are not projections I have made, these are demographers' projections. We're projecting world population to peak in about 60 years at 10 billion.
Yeah.
And then, this sounds like too far away, but another 300 years, world population may be as low as 1 billion.
Yeah.
So it could be that the problem we're dealing with
But
is
I
not
won't be around 300 years from today. So I'm thinking now, over the next decade, 15 years, gee, remember this, connect this back to the young people coming through. We have to think about this in its entirety. Young people coming through the pipe, their hopes, their aspirations, this burst of population in Africa, which certainly is true for the next 10 to 15, 20 years, even if after that it may be difficult to predict. But I think we have to be thoughtful about both food and jobs and the like. And, you know, there are no sectors here. This is actually the reality of how you create jobs in all these countries if you think through that idea of not outsourcing and not so much AI. And then you'll see, you'll back into these.
So this AI part, so we're hosting a conference in a few weeks. Love to invite you or your team on AI and development and thinking through what AI means. And there's lots of discussion on what would AI mean for the developing world and how should the developing world react to AI.
Yeah.
And one extreme version of that is to say, look, I understand there's going to be a scarcity of youth. I understand the youth is going to come from Africa and some parts of South Asia. And so we should really enhance the productivity of youth. The other argument is to say, why do we care so much about the scarcity of people anymore? Because what AI is going to do is make a few people hyper-productive. And in that world of few people hyper-productive, you don't need actually to have most people in the world be working. In fact, there's arguments at UBI, Universal Basic Income, which is there's a few fraction of the people in the world who will produce everything, and there's just going to be universal basic income for the rest of the people who are effectively consumers. So that's these are all sort of visions of the world that are being displayed out there or discussed out there. Our colleagues of mine.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that. How we?
It's
Good luck with that one. I mean, look, AI is, to me, an incredible opportunity in many fronts. The delivery of healthcare, the delivery of education, the ability to deliver those better seeds and fertilizer and marketing and technology to those farmers I was talking about. There's enormous opportunity. The real issue is how is it going to develop in the emerging markets, and to do AI well, if you want to do it locally. If you want to do it globally, that's different. If you do it locally, you're going to need computing power, lots of it. You're going to need electricity, lots of it. You're going to need data, lots of it, kept in its simplest form with safety and security, because that's your national treasure. And you're going to need people who understand how to use that stuff. You show me emerging markets where these four exist, and then I think it's a different discussion. Otherwise, the model cannot be locally. It has to be in some groupings with some global or regional groupings. And I think that gets to the core of to what extent will countries be willing to share their data across borders. And that gets to the core of national security. And that gets to a whole other topic that I'm not qualified to even think about. Right? Megan is. So you should ask her to think about it. My view is that those aspects of AI are going to be quite challenging to work our way through. I see the benefits clearly, and I'm very excited about them, but I don't want to go into it with only one lens. I think you have to have a bit of a couple of lenses here to keep an eye on things. The universal basic income idea requires the concept of redistribution of income to be accepted very deeply in society, and I don't know if society is ready for that. So,
I mean, there is, so you've also talked about bringing investors in, diversifying the source of capital. And I've seen some really fascinating ideas. You've talked about longer 50-year loans as well. You've talked about various blended forms of finance as well.
Yeah.
In this conversation already, we can begin to see that there is a tension, or it seems like it, and I wanted you to sort of weigh into this, a tension between kind of financial returns and social impact. And as you think about these spaces, how do you balance that? Are you concerned about that? Do you think the two can be harmonized together?
Yeah, I think the public sector has to take care of some of those enabling infrastructures, at least until these countries reach a stage of development where public-private partnerships begin to make sense, and where finally the private sector could actually be an owner of a number of that infrastructure. So, for example, toll roads aren't going to work at the early stages of development in a country, but they will at a certain point of time, and so on. So, healthcare, privatizing at an early stage of development in a country may be quite challenging. You would argue some people believe healthcare cannot be privatized even later, but that's an interesting other debate. So I think these are not one size fits all. You've got to think about the public sector playing the enabling role and then the private sector on top. We collected a group of CEOs from operating companies like Tata, all the way to investors like Temasek and BlackRock, to others like banks. And we asked them to tell us, what is it that keeps the private sector back from investing in great numbers in development, even where the business case may well be proven. So if you pick just energy for a minute, solar and wind, solar particularly, has been proven to be per unit cheaper than other forms of energy over a period of time. It does need higher capital investment in the beginning, may have a longer gestation, but it's pretty clear. Or others of that category. So why is it that the money is not pouring in to those sectors? Somebody dreamt up that millions to billions thing, and it hasn't come. And the reason is returns and predictability of returns. And so when you collect these CEOs, 5 clear topics came out. That gets to the point of how do you get the private sector to invest? Because there isn't enough money in the public sector or multilateral banks to make all this happen. And it turns out the first most important thing they all want is predictability of regulatory policy. And I remember that from my days as a CEO. If I couldn't get a clear understanding of what the rules will be on the ground in this country, it's tough for me to commit a 20, 30-year investment without that. The second one is, even if I get that, I need political risk insurance. Because the country could say, actually, I've changed my mind. You can't take your profits out in dollars any longer. Or I now have 2 sets of exchange rates, one official, one unofficial, and so you're going to take your money out at the official rate, which is half the unofficial rate. Very difficult to make money at that rate. So we can provide that in the bank, and we do. And our political risk insurance is doubling over this period. The third is foreign exchange. If I'm investing for 20, 30 years, and I'm investing in local currency, I'm bringing in euros and dollars, and I'm getting paid back in local currency, that's a huge issue. Most of these countries, you can't hedge the euro for 30 years, let alone emerging markets countries. So if I'm going to get a 3, 4, 5-year hedge, how do I cover myself for the rest? So can the bank step in and provide more local currency financing by going to local commercial banks and doing swaps? And so that's what we're doing. IFC at the bank is now doing 45-50% of its financing in local currency, up from 15 2 years ago. The fourth item they'd like to do is get us to do first loss, junior equity.
Yeah.
The project is interesting, just at the edge of being trustworthy and predictable. If the development bank took first loss, it may make me as an investor feel this is a great place to put my money. So the problem with that is if I actually book a loss, I've got to go back to my shareholders to get a replenishment, and that's not a pleasant exercise. So I'm trying to create a shock absorber fund called the Frontier Opportunities Fund, funded partly from my own retained earnings, but also elsewhere. And then the last item to me is actually the item with the most long-term potential. And this is where the real money is sitting in the private sector is not individual investors. It's pension funds and asset managers. Yeah. Pension funds and asset managers manage their investments with a risk profile.
You need a big bulk.
I want this in A category, this in A minus, that much in B plus, this much in B, and so on. And I'm willing to accept this kind of mix. But I need it in large enough tranches because otherwise I'm not moving the needle. So let's say I went to Ontario Teachers Pension Plan and I said to them, wouldn't you guys like exposure to water in Latin America and Africa? They would say, yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Then I give them 22 projects. one in Brazil, one in Colombia, one in Uruguay, one in Kenya, one in Rwanda, 20 million here, 5 million there, 17 million there, 80 million there, all with different covenants, all with different repayment terms. They're not going to buy that. What they want is package it together, put a rating agency wrapper on it, and tell me this is B plus, and I'll pay 92 cents on the dollar. So what I've done is I've reached out to a guy called Doug Peterson, who used to run Standard & Poor's and was my colleague at Citi. And he's just stepped down from Standard & Poor's. So he understands rating agencies and he understands banks. And he's created a group which includes pension funds and investors. And we are working on how to make this happen. It's probably a 3 to 5 year exercise. But to me, that is the real pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The other pieces are good, but that's the large one.
So we're going to move to questions in a few minutes. So if people want to start lining up, we're going to open up in a few minutes. I wanted to, I'd love to have a conversation, but I don't think we have time, but just food for thought is, I love the idea that we're thinking about the public sector and the private sector in tandem, but there's also the nonprofit sector. It'd be very interesting to see in your sort of groupings of sectors contributions, how that sector contributes. Again, maybe we could go offline on this or afterwards in the Q&A. I wanted to end more with a personal reflection. You know, I was sitting there this morning and I was thinking about this event, and I was saying, here are two individuals sitting on this event. We both grew up in Punjab or had families in Punjab. My story is I was a Kashmiri Muslim family, moved from Srinagar to Amritsar, from Amritsar to the Pakistani side during partition, spent time in Africa. And then there are moments in my life which there were either people or places or just moments which were pivotal in my life. You know, a set of parents or grandparents who cared about education, a place like Nigeria which created my love for development in Africa, and institutions like this one and the one which is down the street, which is more mathy, which took a bet on some kid who did well on some standardized tests. Yes. I want to ask you, in your life, you've achieved tremendously. You're the first South Asian president of the World Bank, the first, I think, president from the developing world. What are pivotal moments in your life? A lot of us, you can look at our audience. The Kennedy School is, I think, now 57% international. We're the most international school at Harvard. What are key people, places, and moments which got you where you are now?
Now, to preface this by telling you what I said in the class earlier today, half of life is luck. You have to be lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time.
But luck is not a strategy.
But luck's not a strategy. And you have to seize your luck when it's going by you. If you're not willing to take risks, that luck will pass you by. And you will be the guys left on the train platform waving goodbye to the train, as compared to getting in and making a difference to where that train's going. So don't get me wrong, I'm not a pacifist on the idea that you just sit back and wait for your fate, but you have to be willing to take risks when they come your way. So if you look at my own experiences in life, you know, I mean, how many people do you know who would leave a job like Nestle, 13 years into it, youngest ever this, youngest ever that, and walk away and join, at that time in India, just opening up, a fast food company called Kentucky Fried Chicken? I did. And then I quit that in 2 years because they wanted to float off to franchisees, and I wanted to work for a multinational. And I joined Citibank. So Nestle, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Citibank.
It's a perfect.
It makes all the sense
logical
of the world.
sense.
It makes all the sense of the world, right? Then I spent 14 years there, and I grew all the way to where I was told, you're likely to be the next CEO, and I quit and joined MasterCard. Citibank was 260,000 people. MasterCard was, at that time, 4,000 people. Citibank's market cap at that time was 100 billion. MasterCard's market cap was 20 billion. Fast forward 13 years, MasterCard's market cap 360 billion. Citibank's market cap 60 billion. Now I
think there's a causal claim being made over here.
No.
Figure out what it is. We teach causality over here.
No, now I look like a genius. It's not. It's taking the risks that come your way because you want to go where you think the opportunity makes the best sense for you. People advised me along the way. People encouraged me. Others discouraged me. But taking a risk is just key to where you want to get. It should be a thoughtful risk, but if you're going to skate in your lane, you'll remain in your lane. That's basically kind of what the point I'm trying to make there. And then who would then end up doing what I'm doing now? What does this have to do with all that? And so you have to be willing to pull yourself out of your zone of comfort if you enjoy growing and being different. I enjoy it. I would never have met these guys sitting here if I hadn't gone through what I've gone through. So now I do, and I don't mind that. And that's kind of part of what life is about. Your rewards come not just from the rungs you climb, it's the people you climb with. And just, you got to remember that as you go along. And that to me is really important in the system.
That's great advice.
It's not just one person or one. I have a couple of people who've been enormously helpful to me. Like when I was at Nestle, it was a guy called Barry Ryan, who was the managing director of Nestle in India, many levels above me, who kind of took a liking to me and adopted me and helped me to grow. Or when I joined Citi and Citi merged with Travelers and I met Sandy Weil for the first time, it could have been, he came from Travelers, it could have been the end. Instead, it turned out to be a real partnership where he gave me enormous opportunities of growth. So, you get to meet those people, but you got to seize the opportunity when it comes your way.
I think that's a great message to at least end the general thing. Our own dean has talked about, and we've talked about, how to be policy or development entrepreneurs. This idea of risk-taking. Now, I understand, I want to trivialize it. There is a social structure which allows you the stability, the networks. In the US, I joke, and you celebrate failure. A proud parent will go to their children and say, oh, what's your kid doing? Oh, they're on their third failed company, and everyone celebrates that. Where in many parts of the world, that's not the case, right? And so I think to the point about creating infrastructure, it's also this infrastructure which allows us to really pursue our dreams, to be entrepreneurs in the way you've been able to be.
I think we do take our families along, right? So if you think of my two girls, the elder one went to 9 schools in 3 continents before she finished high school. The younger one went to 8 because of these frequent moves.
Which one ended up at Stanford? Sorry, just curious.
The elder one. She couldn't take the weather, I think. But the reality is that they also went along with this. My wife, all of us. You're in this together. And so, you got to take your risk, but you got to take people with you, take your family with you. And there's a lot going on inside those few sentences.
I agree. I wanted to thank Ajay before we open up. We will clap for him then as well, but I just wanted to acknowledge even what he's saying now. Ajay, we may take a couple of questions in a row if it's okay. So I'm going to try to be as equitable as possible, even though I can't see anyone up there because of the glare, but we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll take maybe 3 questions in a row, and then Ajay can answer. I'll take notes.
I got to remember 3 questions?
I can take notes as well. Please. Ajay really wanted my piece of paper. He really wants to know what I've written there.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Please. And my request is keep your question to be a question, not a commentary, just so we can get as much as possible in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Andres. I'm a student at the medical school.
It helps if you stay near the microphone, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So you mentioned basically 3 pillars of growth. You mentioned enabling infrastructure, regulatory policy, and the private sector. My question is specifically for Mexico. I am from Mexico. Mexico had a lot of growth in the 60s and the 70s. It is not the case anymore. Which of these 3 pillars is lacking, and which one should the next administration focus on?
Mexico has the most per capita economists of a country that I know, and so. Second question.
Thank you. Thank you for such an inspiring conversation. Ajay, last summer at the World Bank, you and Rita told me about the Banga Social Innovation Award on campus. There are many thesis writers that just submitted their thesis. Perhaps it would be nice for you to talk about the vision behind it. But my actual question is about agenda setting. Upon becoming president of the World Bank, you took a very bold step of changing the motto, end poverty on the livable planet, and changing many structures at the World Bank to focus on climate change. And what are the lessons about sustaining such a big change in the agenda, despite when there are drastic changes in the federal administration and their prioritization of climate change. If you could touch upon COP30 in Brazil as well, and how that can help us to shift the focus on climate change and the conversation around the globe. Thank you.
Lady over here.
Hello, my name is Mallory. Thank you for being here. Last but not least, after a particularly intense mission or business trip, what's your personal ritual or way to unwind and reground yourself before jumping to the next challenge?
Great. Ajay, may I ask 30-second quick responses? There's
Sure.
lots of people there.
Sure. So, Mexico. I think Mexico has two issues it needs to get sorted out. One is a broadening of the private sector base, which goes beyond certain selected large companies and growth to a much wider capacity in terms of the companies that could benefit from opportunities there. I think that's a journey that'll be a good one to do. And then the second one is that if you look at Mexico today, there is a large part of Mexico that needs real work. The northern part has got well developed. As you go down south, there's a real challenge. And I think the focus on trying to make sure that that part doesn't get left behind would be quite important in getting Mexico to get a chance to do this well. The part about climate, don't mistake climate to not be an integral part of development or jobs. When I say climate financing, half of what I'm saying is to what we call sustainability or adaptation, which is basically focused on schools that don't get washed away in a hurricane, or roads that don't get washed away in a monsoon, or heat-resistant varieties of seeds. Or as I said earlier, a school whose roof is painted white and not red, so it's 8 degrees cooler inside. That's development. It's education and roads and bridges that are built the right way and smart. Frankly, that should be happening in the developed world as well. The other half is not all about energy, only a portion is. A heck of a large part of it is about building a railroad and not having trucks transport goods, or a bus rapid transit system rather than individual cars, or methane reduction from rice growing is all part of that. So to me, these are all part of development. I think this issue of climate and development being at loggerheads is actually a false issue. And we should think about how to construct them together. How do I unwind? 2 or 3 things. I love music. I listen in music to everything from Queen and Lady Gaga to opera. And that's just the way I am. I'm quirky on music, and so that's how I am. And the second part...
Opera would show up somewhere over
It does, along the middle somewhere. Right? Yes. And the second thing is that I am very lucky that our family, the kids and their husbands and the like, we all enjoy kind of similar stuff, travel, good food, we're foodies, we collect wine, we do things together. And the ability for me to just go back to them and my grandkids and hang out with them and sort of, clear my mind is just invaluable. And that's a huge plus. And they live in New York City. So they're not, when I go back on the weekends from DC, I get a chance to meet them. And that makes it much easier.
Question.
Hi, Ajay. Thanks so much for your time. I'm Ishan. I'm a first year at the college. My question is around the idea of, the idea of the decency quotient that you've spoken about earlier. Now, kind of transitioning again from MasterCard and from other private sector roles to the World Bank, how have you brought that idea of, this decency quotient with you? And how have you instilled it into this massive, massive organization?
Great. Please.
Hi, Ajay. I'm Riyanka, and I'm a student at HBS. We started the conversation tonight with how the US and other Western countries have decided to cut aid. At the same time, China has doubled down on their intention to invest in this area. I'm curious for how you think what a realistic picture would be in 10 to 15 years of the impact this investment will have in terms of their global influence and impact.
Go ahead.
Thanks for speaking to us today. I just want to bring us back to situating ourselves. We talked about the world wars many years ago and the role of the bank. I want to bring us to the present situations where the cost of war is further going down with more and more technology. How are you in the bank's agenda accounting for the potential developmental aid that the bank will have to give to finance some of these situations going forward?
Great. Let's take maybe a fourth because we may not have round to next for.
Hi, thank you for your time. My name is Jordan Young, and I'm a senior at the college. I'm curious what strategy you see multilateral development banks playing in reducing the infrastructure investment gap, and more specifically, how you see innovative finance like green bonds and blended finance, what role you see that.
So, decency quotient. Linda is sitting here. And Linda wrote a case study on MasterCard in my last couple of years on that. You know, it started out as a joke, she'll tell you. I kind of one day, I was trying to explain to people in MasterCard what I meant about being constructive and giving people a level playing field and having your hand on their back and not in their face. And I just watched a Warren Buffett Investor Day. And he used to invest in this thing called Dairy Queen, an ice cream, which was DQ. Meanwhile, I stand up in the morning at a town hall, and I'm still trying to explain this thing. And I said, you know, when I was young, as you realized, I have a slightly crazy sense of humor. So when I was young, it used to be IQ that was important. So when Mike and I were both younger, it was intelligence quotient. Along the way, when we both went to our degrees, it became EQ, your emotional quotient. You had to deal with ambiguity and the like. And I kind of said, you know, now I mean DQ and not Dairy Queen, but your decency quotient, which is, do you bring that part of you to work, which allows people to feel, you'll give them a level playing field, you'll have their hand on the back, you won't have it in their face, but you will be pushing from the back. So I'm not talking about being nice. I'm not talking about being kind. I'm talking about being fair and transparent and consistent with how you speak about things to people, investing in them, caring for them, but pushing them to succeed. That goes everywhere. It doesn't have to be in a company or in the World Bank or in Harvard Kennedy or not in another place. It's just how you conduct yourself at home, in work, in social settings, everywhere. And so I think that's how I think about decency. Topic of, what did I write here? Oh yeah, the green bonds and the like. My eyesight is going.
You missed Riyanka's.
Yeah, no, I'm going to come back. I sort of try to go through this and make sure. Tell me the second question. What is yours again?
On China.
Yes. So aid, that's what I'd written. I was wondering what scribbled over there. So China increased its inputs into the Belt and Road Initiative quite a while ago. It's not a new thing that's happening today. It's been happening for a decade. I would argue with you that the Western world's aid system catered to a very different requirement from what China's BRI was doing. Places like the World Bank were doing things like that, but the aid system in the Western world principally goes mostly to either humanitarian causes or basic health. And I mean, one of the best things we've done was PEPFAR, for example, which is to fight HIV challenges in Africa. Those kinds of things are very different from what BRI was aimed to. So I actually don't think the question belongs directly tied up to each other. There's a bigger issue here, which is what's the Western world's thinking about how it wants to engage in the developing world going forward. And there I believe institutions like ours, where if you give us $1, I leverage it 10 times in the bond market because of my AAA rating, and I can do something with that money in terms of the investments we were talking about, whether it's infrastructure or regulatory policy or the private sector. Those are the kinds of ways to think about the power of what can be done with the multilateral development world. I'm not into the China versus US versus other rivalry. That's not my job. My job is to bring people together to do something on the ground to help with development. And that's what I'm focused on, right? Your question on the green bonds and infrastructure development and investment. Part of it is just this very point of the leveraging in the bond market. But we've done a bunch of green bonds, we've done debt swaps, a whole lot. In my own way of thinking about this, we've got to be careful not to sort of get carried away by the innovative nature of some of these, but their small size. So as I said a little earlier, a lot of them are like pimples on a dimple on an ant's left cheek compared to what we need as real resources to make things happen. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. We're doing them too, mostly to see if we can seed the opportunity for enormous future growth in them at the right time. But if you ask me to place money on where the money has to come from in the coming years, I would tell you it has to come from those contributions and the AAA bond market, AAA ratings, and the bond market on the one hand, and then getting the private sector deeply involved where it makes sense. We're going to fight a losing battle if we rely on just a few things like debt swaps and green bonds. Important, but they're not going to get us there quickly enough. And that's just a huge challenge. And I know I missed something.
Cost of war and development.
Yeah, the bank has nothing to do directly either with defense, war, or dual-use technologies, just to be clear. The impact of war on what happens to countries, that worries me. I try and stay away from the humanitarian aspect of it. So in Ukraine, for example, the role we've played is taken money given by the United States, Japan, Korea, and the UK to us and put it to work in Ukraine against specific directions from them to either pay school teachers' salaries or meals for kids in schools or administrative bureaucrats' salaries, things that they could trace directly into their bank accounts and to keep the system going, as compared to humanitarian assistance for which there are other agencies who do a better job than us. Same is true in, say, a place like Gaza. If we were to come around to reconstructing in Gaza or Ukraine, we have a plan for how to help if our shareholders would like us to do that. We believe there are specific pillars of what we could do, but we've got to kind of get to that point in the coming weeks or months as this develops.
So I know Ajay's flight is delayed, but I'll take the liberty of just one last question, maybe the lady over here, and then we'll end with that last question.
I promise to write it better this time.
Thank you so much. I recently learned in a class at HKS that the high cost of capital in countries like Pakistan means that a large proportion of government revenues in these countries ends up going towards interest payments. So, 55% of Pakistan's annual government revenue goes towards interest to the US, to China, to the World Bank, to the IMF, leaving very little money to actually spend on development. Could you maybe share what your thoughts are on that problem and anything the World Bank is doing to try to resolve that?
So there's a statistic that will tell you that a number of countries around the world are paying more on debt repayment than what they spend on infrastructure, health, and education put together. The reason we've ended up in this place, which seems to be a cycle that comes every few decades, is that when interest rates were low, borrowing was very abundant. The problem is the dollar strengthened and interest rates went up, and a double whammy has hit many countries where they've got large amounts of debt in dollar-denominated loans, which now mean higher interest and a higher FX issue. The good news is some of that has stabilized and corrected over the last year. In fact, you'll find, if you look at the IMF and our reports on debt sustainability, things are actually improving over the last year. And I think in the current direction, there could be hope in the future as well. Having said that, hope's not a strategy. And so there are a few countries that are going through a G20 framework for debt relief. So Chad, Ethiopia, Ghana, and I think the Congo have gone through it and are in the process of going through it. And for those 4 countries, we are the ones who are giving them money in the last 3 to 4 years. Essentially, about 17, 18 billion has gone to them. Half of that, pure grants, no repayment, no interest, no repayment. Half of that, deeply concessional through IDA. Nobody else can give them money right now, but they're working their way through the debt reprofiling with their creditors, and almost all of them are now through that to come out the other side. so they can again start getting back into putting money into development. It's a long, hard process. It's not easy. And there is no easy way to turn the tide back on this and just say, let's unwind. What's happened between the prior debt crisis and now is that what used to be called the Paris Club of Countries, which was essentially the OECD world, were the big debtors. It's now very different. China is a big debtor, but other bilateral countries are also big debtors. And so it's got, and then the commercial markets have become big debtors as well. Again, the profile of debt has changed completely. So now to do a debt workout in a country, you need to get the Paris Club aligned, you need to get the Chinas of the world aligned, and you need to get the commercial lenders aligned. And then you can get to a place where you get a resolution. That's harder, much harder.
Great. I think we'll have to call it. We could go all night on this. I wanted to end by thanking Ajay. He's rotating my paper. The only gift I can give Ajay is some colored socks, which will be in the mail for you. Please
You're assuming
join.
I'm going to wear those.
Maybe you'll make fun of people who wear them. Either way. I wanted to thank Ajay for sharing his time with us, for sharing his candid conversations. We hope you come again. We love having you here. I hope our students will have a chance to interact further with you.
Thank you.